Hey guys, tonight we slip into the bitter cold of medieval Europe, where snow seeps through your roof, your boots have holes the size of walnuts, and dinner might just be a spoonful of watery turnip mush. You're not a noble or a knight. Nope, you're just you. And right now you're stuck in a peasant's hut, and winter has only just begun. The wind claws at the wooden door like it's hungry. Your breath comes out in visible puffs, even indoors. The stone walls weep with damp, and the thatch roof leaks with every gust of sleet. There's no insulation unless you count hay stuffed in the cracks, and your mattress is essentially a lumpy sack of old straw that smells like goat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere between 1250 and 1350, give or take a famine. You don't own a calendar, you barely own socks. Winter doesn't arrive with a cheery snowflake graphic on the weather app. It just creeps in one morning like a curse. Maybe your joints ache or the air bites harder than usual. The sky turns a dull grey and suddenly the sun disappears by mid-afternoon, never bothering to explain itself. You shiver, grab your cloak, an uneven woolen thing stiff with age, and think, here we go again. Your hut, generous by medieval standards, fits you, your family, a few chickens and the smell of wet straw. There's a single room with a pitiful hearth in the center, smoke escaping through a hole in the ceiling, if you're lucky. Most huts don't even have that. You cough through the haze of soot that clings to the low rafters. Historians still argue whether medieval people grew used to constant indoor smoke or just perpetually wheezed their way through life. To call it home is generous. It's more like a semi-permanent defense against death. The walls are wattle and daub, sticks woven together and smeared with mud and dung. Yes, dung. It's cheap and surprisingly effective at keeping out drafts. Not the smell though, that stays. Tonight, like most nights, you tuck into a blanket that was probably once white, now the color of medieval despair. You're sleeping beside the hearth, because that's the only warmish spot. You, your spouse, two of the kids, and the dog all curl up like firewood, except the firewood is actually more useful. There's no such thing as personal space. If someone sneezes, you all get sick, again. Outside, the wind moans like some lonely ghost. Inside, it's somehow worse. The floor is packed earth, colder than your ex's heart. You hear scurrying. Mice, maybe a rat, could be both. The dog lifts its head, snorts, and promptly goes back to sleep. You wish you could do the same, but sleep in winter is tricky. Your nose freezes, your toes go numb, and no amount of layering seems to help. Your clothes double as pajamas, wool tunic, linen underlayer, and if you're lucky, a threadbare hood. Fashion isn't the goal, survival is. Your undergarments haven't seen a wash since late October, and it's now January. You convince yourself this is fine. Everybody smells like boiled onions and regret. If it's good enough for your neighbors, it's good enough for you. Sometimes, if the fire burns down and you wake up shivering, you'll throw a log on if you have one. More often, you just scoot closer to the embers and pretend that frostbite isn't creeping up your left foot. It's a slow and quiet threat, like your in-laws. You remember the one time a traveling tinker passed through and mentioned chimneys. Some far-off nobles have stone fireplaces with actual flues. Imagine that smoke going up and out instead of into your lungs. Wild stuff. He also claimed he'd seen glass windows. You laugh even now thinking about it. Glass in a house. What's next? Indoor plumbing. Occasionally you worry about the structural integrity of your roof. Heavy snow has a way of caving in the dreams of peasants. You and your neighbor once propped up your mutual walls with a fallen tree trunk after a storm. It's still there. You check it every few days. That's as close as you get to home repair. When you step outside at dawn, if you dare, you crunch over frozen mud and manure. The air slices into your lungs like cold knives. A rooster screams in the distance, possibly in protest. The fields are bare, your hands are chapped, and there's that one patch of your roof that insists on dripping icy water onto your pillow at night. Every single night. The pigs huddle in their own filth. The chickens are molting and grumpy. The goat, for reasons known only to the goat, has decided your storage shed is her winter home now. You've lost that battle. She's in charge now. But somehow, through sheer grit and perhaps a touch of denial, you manage. You rub your hands together until the friction almost counts as warmth. You make tea out of boiled bark or last season's herbs. You eat stale bread, break off the mouldy parts, and convince yourself the green fuzz adds flavor. A neighbor once bragged that he had a window shutter that actually closed. You didn't believe him, but you pretended to be impressed. That's what passes for bragging rights in this village. Functional hinges. You think of summer, briefly, the itch of hay, the endless work, the lack of snow inside your boots. But that's months away. Right now, the wind howls, the sky droops, and your breath still looks like ghost mist in the lamplight. Welcome to your winter. You probably won't survive this. But let's see how far you get, shall we? You wake with a start again. The cold has crept into your bones, and your foot, the one closest to the door, feels like it belongs to someone else, someone dead. You wriggle your toes, then pull your knees up under your tunic like a medieval burrito, which is a lot less delicious than it sounds. The fire has long since died down to a few sullen embers. You could get up and rekindle it, but that would mean leaving your fragile nest of warmth. So you lie there debating whether potential frostbite is worse than moving. Eventually, nature wins. You get up, grumbling. Your breath fogs the room again, and you fumble for a few sticks of half-damp kindling. They hiss and complain as you toss them into the hearth, but you blow steadily, cheeks puffing like a determined bellows. After a few coughs and a prayer to whatever local saint you think is in charge of fire, possibly Saint Bridget, you get a flame. Success. You don't cheer. You're not trying to wake the baby, but you do feel a flicker of pride. Now that you're up, it's time to think about your winter routine. First stop, the latrine. You groan. There's nothing quite like braving the cold to squat over a hole in the ground at 6 a.m. It's located across the yard, a majestic wooden box over a pit. There's a half-rotten curtain instead of a door. No seat, just a slab with a hole, and the fresh, invigorating scent of 6 months' worth of family contributions. A refreshing start to your morning. Historians still argue whether the average peasant had a designated privy or simply relied on a shovel and some good aim. You've seen both in your short, frosty life. Either way, your dignity froze and shattered weeks ago. Back inside, it's time to break your fast, although break implies something with texture. Today's feast is cold porridge left over from last night. You scoop it out of a cracked wooden bowl, reheat it over your tiny fire, and pretend not to notice the texture. It's crunchy. You hope it's oats. It might be mouse droppings. You eat it anyway. Breakfast in medieval winter is less about taste and more about function. It's calories or bust. If you're lucky, there might be a lump of cheese aged into something resembling a weapon or a slab of coarse bread. It's stale, of course. You dunk it in a bit of weak ale to soften it. Water isn't always safe to drink, but ale is boiled and blessed. You've never been so grateful for a drink that tastes like someone cried into barley. Your daily chores can't be postponed, even in winter. Animals need feeding. The ones that haven't been slaughtered for winter stores still require attention, though they don't appreciate it. The chickens glare at you with tiny frozen resentment. The pig, the one you didn't kill because she might be pregnant, eyes your leg like it owes her money. You toss her some scraps and hope she doesn't turn violent. She once bit your cousin and he still walks with a limp. Out in the field, what's left of it, you check for signs of storm damage. The fences sag under snow, and the thatched storage hut has a suspicious lean. You pat it like a friend who's having a rough day. Not today, you whisper. The shed groans. You pretend that's just the wind. You pull your cloak tighter and trudge through the snow toward the village centre. The road is little more than compacted mud and manure that's frozen into an ankle-snapping obstacle course. You pass your neighbour Ethel, a woman with eyebrows thicker than most people's cloaks. She grunts hello. You grunt back. Conversation is a luxury, best saved for spring. In the heart of the village is the communal oven, which occasionally gets warm enough to bake bread or thaw your fingers. A few other villagers are already gathered around it, pretending not to shiver. Someone brought weak cider. You sip and chat about important things like whose goat wandered into whose house last week, and whether the baker's son is cursed. Standard gossip. A travelling friar once told you about a miraculous place called Rome, where even in winter people wear sandals and olives fall from trees. You wonder if he was joking or delirious. Olives on trees, madness. Still, not everything in medieval winter is doom and gloom. You've got community. Everyone suffers together, and that makes it bearable-ish. People share what little they have. One family might lend you a cloak, another offers dried beans in exchange for firewood. The barter economy thrives under hardship. One time you traded a single hen's egg for a candle. It was worth it. The candle lasted 3 nights. The egg would have been gone in 3 bites. A quirky little tradition pops into your mind. Remember Martimas. Back in early November, the village slaughtered animals in a communal frenzy to prepare for winter. You vaguely recall dancing, laughter, and the sweet, sickly smell of blood and salt. Everything was preserved in brine or smoked over oak fires. Historians still argue whether Martimas marked the official beginning of winter or just a practical excuse to use up the year's surplus. Either way, the memory feels warm compared to today. You take your share of preserved meat, a sliver of salted pork, hard as regret, and gnaw on it like a survivor, because that's what you are so far. Back home, you check the root cellar. You've stored turnips, onions, and maybe a sad apple or two. The cold keeps things from spoiling, but it also makes everything feel like chewing on sadness. Still, food is food. You wrap the turnips in old cloth to keep the frost off. A rat scurries by and you hiss at it like a medieval cat. It hisses back, unafraid. The rat wins. By evening, the sky bruises purple, then fades to black. You light a rushlight, a primitive candle made by dipping dried reeds in animal fat. It sputters like it's annoyed to be awake. The smell is unique, greasy, comforting in a way. Like grandma's cooking, if grandma were a tallow merchant. You settle in by the hearth, your body aching from a day of simply existing. You've survived another cycle of cold, filth, hunger, and rodents. Tomorrow will be exactly the same, and that's somehow the best-case scenario. You're up again before dawn, not because you want to be. Your dreams were finally starting to get cozy, but because the roof decided to drip melting frost water directly onto your forehead. It's not a leak exactly, more of a seasonal honesty in the thatching. You blink, groan, and wipe the freezing droplet from your brow, then pull the blanket tighter over your shoulders, which is only marginally better than wearing a thin hope. Today is a work day, but then again, so was yesterday, and every day before that. Winter doesn't do weekends. You start with the fire again, a routine now, coaxing flames out of damp wood and sheer will. You catch a decent spark, and the fire responds with a hiss, a few pops, and a vague smell like burnt moss and despair. The baby coughs in the corner, wrapped tight in layers of linen and sheep's wool. You check on them, still warm, still breathing. That's a good sign. You feel a flicker of something like joy, or at least relief. You glance toward the single, smoked glass window. A pale light is trying to leak in, more a hint than a promise. You know that means you'll need to brave the outside world again. The snow is half melted into slush today, which means mud is coming. And in medieval times, mud isn't just soil and water. It's everything that happens in the street. Human things, animal things. You try not to think too hard about it as you pull on your boots, which are still damp from yesterday's journey and smell faintly of goat. Your main task today, chop firewood. You knew this was coming, but that doesn't make it less painful. The good news is you still have axes. The bad news is your hands are stiff, your gloves are fraying, and you've lost 2 fingertips worth of feeling since December. You trudge out to the edge of the woods where the trees, gnarled, damp and brooding, stand like frozen witnesses to your suffering. One chop, then another. The rhythm helps. You fall into a dull cadence, half prayer, half curse. Bits of bark fly and soon your arms begin to burn, which is somehow comforting. A sign you're still alive. You stack the logs in a pile that looks smaller than it feels. You'll have to do it again tomorrow, and the day after. You don't question it anymore. There's a rumour that nobles spend winter by the hearth, drinking spiced wine and listening to wandering minstrels strum lutes. You try to picture it. Do they even feel the cold? Historians still argue how insulated those stone castles really were. Some say tapestries and roaring fires made them cozy. Others insist the damp crept in regardless. Either way, you're fairly certain they weren't chopping their own firewood at dawn while swatting away frostbitten squirrels. Still, you try not to envy them too much. Nobles have their own problems, like gout. or getting poisoned by overly ambitious cousins, perspective. On the way back, you swing by the village well. Water isn't frozen over today, thank the saints. You draw a bucket, straining with your numb fingers to grip the rope. The creak of the pulley sounds like it might snap, but it holds for now. You scoop a quick drink. It tastes slightly metallic, slightly earthy, and entirely necessary. You pass by the baker's cottage and smell something magical. Warm bread. Your stomach growls in open rebellion. You consider bartering, but you have nothing to trade today. The baker, perhaps out of pity or shared suffering, tosses you a small crust. You nod in gratitude and munch it slowly, savoring each grain like it's a luxury. You recall one of those quirky facts a traveling merchant once shared while waiting out a storm in the village square. Medieval people sometimes believed winter ailments came from humours becoming imbalanced, particularly due to cold phlegm invading the body. Hence, some locals would choose spicy herbs to warm the blood. You tried that once, nearly coughed up a lung, but hey, it cleared your sinuses for a week. The church bell tolls faintly in the distance, the sound muffled by snow and fog. It's not Sunday, so you're not expected at Mass, but you do cross yourself out of habit. Superstition runs deeper in winter. When everything's dark and uncertain, a little divine insurance feels like a wise investment. Back home, the midday meal is a thick soup, turnips, barley, maybe a piece of salted fish if you're lucky. You boil it with herbs you dried back in the fall, thyme, nettle, maybe some mint if you're feeling fancy. It helps disguise the fact that you've eaten this same meal for 30 straight days. Your stomach doesn't complain. Hunger tends to lower expectations. As the sun sinks low early, as always, you prepare for another long night. You stuff every possible crack in the wall with cloth, wool, or even straw to keep the draft at bay. You notice a new one just under the roof beam. You sigh and plug it with a rag that used to be part of a tunic. Fashion must always bow to warmth. You wrap the baby tighter, then huddle close beside them and your partner, creating a pile of humanity bound by breath and desperation. You remember the joke your uncle used to make. The best way to survive winter is to become a dog, sleep in a pile and bark at everyone who tries to move you. A distant howl breaks the silence. Wolves, maybe. They've been getting bolder lately. Last week they took a goat from the outer farm. You tell yourself you're safe in the village, but you still push a log against the door, just in case. You lie back. The fire cracks quietly. A mouse scurries across the rafters. The rushlight gutters. You pull your cloak up over your face and whisper to no one in particular. One more day down. Sleep, as always, is a luxury that mocks more than it restores. The wind scratches at the shutters all night, sounding almost like whispers. Or maybe that's just your mind, frayed by the cold and frugal dreams. You wake often, never fully sure whether it's the draft creeping in or the sound of some nocturnal creature scuttling near the hearth. When morning comes, it's not a sudden brightness, but more of a gentle smudge of grey across the world. No rooster crows today. Perhaps he's frozen solid or simply wise enough to stay silent. You sit up, bones aching as if your joints have been replaced with gravel. Winter in a medieval village doesn't just steal warmth, it steals movement, comfort, and eventually the illusion that things might get easier. Today you're not gathering wood or fetching water. No, today is dedicated to one of the more stomach-churning winter necessities, preserving what's left of your food before it rots or gets stolen by animals. You make your way to the tiny storehouse near the edge of your cottage, a creaking shed made from warped planks and prayers. Inside are root vegetables hanging in burlap sacks, salted meat wrapped in linen, and the last of the hard cheese wheel that has aged enough to serve as either sustenance or weapon. Food preservation is not just a chore, it's a matter of finesse and luck. Salting meat, drying herbs, sealing nuts in clay pots, all of it must be done meticulously, because one mouldy turnip could turn into an outbreak of stomach horror faster than you can say boiled gruel. You run your hand along the sides of the jars and clay pots, checking for cracks or leaks. Any weakness could mean spoilage, or worse, infestation. You recall the time last winter when the flower was infested with weevils, tiny little things that burrowed right in. You tried sifting them out, but eventually gave up and just accepted the extra protein. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers minded insects in their meals or whether hunger made them surprisingly philosophical about it. You sigh and set about resalting the meat, which involves layering coarse salt over slivers of dried pork and hanging them just high enough to avoid curious rats. The salt stings your fingers, cracked and raw from weeks of cold, but there's a strange satisfaction to the ritual. It smells sharp like brine and old smoke, and it reminds you of warmer months when preservation wasn't about survival but preparation. In the background, someone is singing. A neighbour, maybe. The song is in an old dialect you half remember, something about keeping the wolves from the door. Literally, music in winter is less about celebration and more about reassurance. A tune to remind you that you're still here, still breathing, still part of something bigger than your hunger. Once the meat is secured, you check the root cellar, a pit beneath the cottage, reinforced with straw and stone. It's barely taller than a crouch and smells like wet dirt and onions. You light a stubby tallow candle and descend carefully, ducking your head and trying not to drop the flame. The temperature down here stays just above freezing, perfect for storing things like cabbage, parsnips, or the occasional smug-looking beet. The candlelight flickers across shelves stacked with bottles and bags. You check each one. A few potatoes have gone soft and started to sprout like they're trying to escape. You mutter a quick apology before tossing them to the compost heap. At least something will grow from them eventually. Maybe. Rising back to the surface feels like returning from the underworld. You blink against the pale daylight and stretch your back, which makes a sound like someone stepping on a twig. The children are playing nearby. Well, not exactly playing. They're huddled around a hoop and stick, taking turns pushing it through the slush with mild enthusiasm. Toys are rare and usually homemade, passed down from sibling to sibling until they're more splinters than structure. One child falls and lands face first in the mud. The others laugh, including the fallen one. You can't help but smile. Even in the bleakest winters, kids somehow find joy in the dumbest things. It's oddly inspiring. You head inside and rummage through your bundle of herbs. This is your winter medicine chest. Bundles of dried nettle, yarrow and sage, some tied with string, others crammed into old socks. You boil a few in water for a tonic, though what it cures is anyone's guess. People used to think everything from headaches to bad dreams could be cured with enough thyme tea and a solid prayer. Of course, not all remedies are so gentle. You remember old Marta, the village midwife and all-around herbalist, once recommending a concoction of garlic and fermented sheep's milk for warding off winter cough. You tried it once. Your breath nearly killed a chicken. Still, it's better than the other popular solution, bloodletting. Historians still argue whether bloodletting actually helped with winter ailments or was just a creative way of thinning out the population. Either way, you steer clear. Your veins are cold enough without help. You patch up the holes in your wool leggings while sipping your herbal broth. Your fingers, clumsy and red, prick themselves more than the fabric. The thread is coarse, dyed with whatever plant you could boil into color, onion skins, walnut husks, or if you're lucky, madder root for a reddish hue. You're not making a fashion statement though, this is about survival, not vogue. As dusk falls again, you begin preparing supper. It's soup, again. A handful of barley, a dried carrot, and a few shavings of that cheese weapon. You toss in some dried mint to confuse your taste buds into thinking you're somewhere better. You sip it slowly, cradling the warm bowl in your hands as if it were treasure. In winter, it is. You think about how the monks up at the nearby abbey live. They too eat simple meals, though perhaps more often. Their gardens were harvested with careful planning, and their root cellars are rumoured to stretch beneath the entire monastery. Some say they even keep bees in hollowed logs for honey. Others claim they drink spiced ale every night. The truth is likely somewhere in between. The point is you're mildly jealous. The candlelight dances on the ceiling as night creeps in again. You seal up the food stores, wrap yourself in every stitch of cloth you own, and tuck your toes beneath the dog who's more heat source than pet these days. You whisper to the fire to burn just a bit longer. Maybe tomorrow you'll barter for a new sack of flour, or maybe you'll wake up to frost inside your nose. Either way, you'll manage. You always do. Your eyes open to the stillness of another frigid dawn. No church bells, no bird song, just that aching quiet of deep winter when even the wind seems to mutter instead of howl. You sit up, neck stiff, breath rising in white puffs. Your bed is just a straw-stuffed sack draped in rough wool blankets, each one more like a burlap ghost than a comfort. You kick your legs out from the warmth with a grimace, already regretting it. Today is market day, or at least it would be if the roads weren't half buried in ice and manure. Still, you decide to go. Staying in the cottage too long does things to your brain, like convincing you that chewing old leather straps might be a good snack idea. So you bundle up in your heaviest layers, 2 tunics, a threadbare cloak and boots so patched they're basically optimism with soles. You step outside and your lungs seize at the cold. The world is a muted white, powdered with last night's flurries. The ground crunches beneath your feet in that oddly satisfying way, like breaking a frozen creme brulee of mud and goat droppings. You nod to your neighbor who's busy chasing a chicken that apparently does not wish to participate in the day's bartering. The market is in the village square, which is generous language for a packed-down patch of snow ringed by tired stalls and more tired faces. You pass a woman selling turnip cakes that smell suspiciously like ash, a man holding up strips of dried eel, and a boy with frozen rabbit pelts bundled over one arm like fur spaghetti. There's even a potter showing off mugs so misshapen they look like they were sculpted during an earthquake, but hey, you need a new one anyway. Trade is slow, people are poor, and nobody wants to travel far in this weather. But here you are clutching your last decent item of value, a carved wooden spoon with a design you swear was inspired, though you forget by what. Maybe it was a dream or a squirrel. Either way, you're hoping it's enough to score some flour or dried beans. The woman running the grain stall squints at your spoon, shrugs, and eventually agrees to half a sack of oats and a pinch of salt. You try to hide your disappointment, but let's be real, this isn't an era of fair trade. Still, the salt is a prize. It's imported, and in winter it's almost currency. You pocket it like treasure and move on. Nearby, an older man offers firewood, but it's damp and smoking even as it sits. You consider it, then shake your head. You'd be paying for fuel and a lung infection. Better to scavenge fallen limbs in the woods if you're willing to risk frostbite and the occasional overly confident badger. A hush rolls over the square as a cart arrives, drawn by 2 exhausted oxen and piled with barrels. It's the brewer's cart. The villagers gather close like bees to a hive, even the children suddenly alert. Ale is more than a drink. It's warmth, calories and mild forgetfulness all in one tankard. You watch people barter everything from wool socks to chicken feathers to get a small flask of it. You consider your options. You could part with your spare cloak lining if you call that moth-eaten flap a lining, but it's risky. Then again, some ale tonight might be the difference between sleeping and staring at the ceiling wondering how many toes you still have. You make the trade. The brewer gives you a nod and a small smile, like a merchant of dreams. Historians still argue whether the ale in medieval villages was safer than the water, or just more fun to drink. Probably both. Either way, you tuck the flask deep in your satchel like it's contraband. By midday, the cold bites harder, and the market begins to thin out. You stop by the tanner's stall, and eye a pair of fur mittens that look actually warm. The price is absurd. He wants dried apples, a spool of thread, and a favour come spring. You walk away. Your dignity, like your fingers, is fragile but still intact. You head home slowly, slipping once and cursing under your breath. It's not the cold that's the worst part of these journeys. It's the grey sameness, the quiet grind of survival. Every trip feels like a gamble. Will someone have what you need? Will you get swindled? Will your last pair of socks disappear in the snow? But as you near your cottage, you spot something that lifts your spirits. A neighbour has left a small bundle on your doorstep. Inside, you find 3 onions tied together with twine and a rough scrap of parchment with a charcoal drawing of a smiley sun. No signature, no message, just that simple act of kindness that for a moment feels warmer than the ale. You stash the onions, stoke the fire, and set the pot to boiling. Tonight's dinner will be oat and onion gruel, which, while sounding like a punishment, is actually decent by winter standards. You swirl in the salt for taste and pretend it's gourmet. By candlelight, you mend one of your socks while sipping a thimbleful of ale. The liquid burns, then warms, then relaxes your shoulders just a bit. You lean back, watching the shadows flicker like dancers across the beams. In the quiet, you think about the simplicity of trade, how one spoon can become oats, how a bit of cloth becomes a warm drink. You remember the old legend told by the storyteller at last year's festival, the one about a village so generous that every winter gift returned tenfold. You don't believe it, of course, but still, tomorrow, you think maybe you'll leave something on someone else's doorstep. Maybe kindness is the one thing in winter that doesn't freeze. Your back aches before the day even begins. You've barely slept, tossing and turning as the fire slowly died down to a few lazy embers. The wind hissed at the shutters all night like a cat with a grudge. And now, just before dawn, the room's colder than your childhood memories of bathing in the river. You slide out of bed, muttering something unkind about medieval living, and immediately regret it as your toes touch the icy floor. Still, there's work to be done. You're low on kindling, and the firewood pile looks like it's been visited by particularly hungry gremlins. You wrap your cloak tighter and brace yourself to head into the forest. Wood gathering in winter isn't optional, it's survival, and if you don't top up your stash now, you'll be burning furniture legs by week's end. The forest looms just outside the village, and even in daylight it feels like stepping into another world. Tall pines creak under the weight of snow, dead leaves crunch beneath your boots. Your breath hangs in the air like a private ghost. You carry a small axe and a crude sled, the kind that's seen better centuries, and you keep an eye out for fallen limbs, fresh green wood. Smoke's too much, but the stuff that's dry and grey and half hidden beneath snow is pure gold. You spot a likely branch and bend to test it. It snaps clean, light and dry. Perfect. You toss it onto your sled, repeating the process until it looks like a toddler's attempt at a bonfire sculpture. Not bad. But as you turn back, a sound rustles nearby. Not a deer, not a bird. Something heavier. A boar? Wolves? One of those weird forest hermits who talks to trees and smells like mushrooms? You freeze, axe ready. Not bravely, just prepared to scream convincingly. But after a few tense seconds, it's gone. Probably just wind, or the forest testing your nerves. Again, you hurry back, your sled dragging along behind like a tired dog. The village gate offers a sense of safety that's almost laughable. A splintery wooden frame with a bent hinge, but it's home. You nod to the guard on duty, who's mostly just a warm body holding a spear and trying not to blink too fast in the cold. Back inside, you stack your wood near the hearth. You can't help but feel a weird sense of pride. It's not much, but it's heat, it's cooking fuel, and it's the difference between comfort and misery. Just as you sit to rest, the church bell rings once, a single toll. That means something's happened. You sigh, because in winter, it's rarely good news. Sure enough, word spreads quickly. Old Gervais the miller passed in the night, likely frostbite in his sleep. His cottage was draughty and his sons had left for the city. Sad, yes. Surprising, not really. People die in winter the way leaves fall in autumn, quietly, without asking permission. Historians still argue whether rural medieval villages saw more winter deaths from illness or cold exposure. But honestly, it's a bit of both, with some starvation sprinkled on top for fun. The village priest calls for a burial at sundown. That means everyone who can walk will go, not just for Gervais, but for the community. You dig out your warmest wool cap and a candle stub. It's tradition to carry light to guide the soul, though it does nothing for your toes. As the sun dips, you and the others gather near the edge of the burial ground. The grave is shallow, it has to be. The ground's frozen like iron, and the coffin is more of a wooden box than anything. The priest says a few words. Gervais's dog howls once, then settles. You murmur the prayers, not out of deep faith necessarily, but because rituals are warm in their way. They give structure, comfort, a bit like soup, if soup could recite Latin. Afterward, someone passes around a shared flask. It tastes like mouldy apples and regret, but it burns your throat in a good way. You pass it on. No one talks much. What's left to say? Another candle extinguished. Another night begun. As you walk home in the dark, lanterns swaying at your side, you spot small yellow eyes in the distance, fox maybe, or cat, or something older, something from the stories, like the ones whispered by grandmothers over spinning wheels. You quicken your pace just in case. Back in your cottage, you check the fire, still alive. You add a log, one of the good ones you gathered earlier, and breathe easier. It crackles, pops, and fills the room with a kind of music you never appreciated before living like this. You warm your hands, then your face, and finally stretch out near the hearth like a lazy animal, grateful for the flickering orange glow. Tomorrow you'll need to dig out the path again, maybe patch the hole in the roof, maybe check if that rat you trapped under the bucket is still alive. But tonight you'll sit in silence for a while, maybe hum a tune, maybe stare into the flames until the edges of thought blur. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, now heavy with the scent of wood, smoke and earth. You remember how as a child you used to think winter was magical. Snowflakes on lashes, hot drinks by the fire, the thrill of sledding. Now it's a test. A long drawn-out exam in patience, grit, and the fine art of not losing your mind to the cold. And yet there's a strange beauty in it, the way survival slows time, the way a single good fire can feel like victory, the way people, even strangers, show up for funerals and share flasks and leave onions on doorsteps. It's not glamorous, but it's real. You add another log, you lie back on the wooden floor, which creaks like it's telling secrets. Your eyelids droop, the wind outside sounds gentler now, like it's moved on to bother someone else. Sleep, when it comes, is uneven, but warm. The morning light filters through frost-laced windows, painting your room in pale blue and grey. You wake to a chill that even your thick wool blankets couldn't fend off. The fire's nearly dead, and the embers whisper promises of warmth long since broken. You sigh and reach for your shoes, which feel as stiff as ancient tree roots. Time to face another day in this medieval winter, where comfort is a luxury and endurance is everything. Your first task is food. Last night's meagre stew was barely enough to keep the gnawing hunger at bay. The village granary isn't overflowing. You remember hearing that the previous harvest was thin, thanks to late frost and early blight. Grain scarcity in winter isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous, and yet the granary is guarded with more care than the castle's treasure, because food stores meant survival for the entire village. You trudge toward the granary, boots crunching on snow packed hard by countless footsteps. The building is a squat stone structure, designed to keep rats and moisture at bay. Inside, sacks of grain sit stacked on wooden pallets, but they're lighter than last season. You help the miller's apprentice scoop out some grain for your family's ration, feeling the rough texture of barley grains sift through your fingers. Here's a mainstream fact. Medieval villages often stored grain communally to survive the winter months, pooling resources to ensure everyone had at least something to eat. But despite such efforts, crop failures or harsh winters could still bring famine. As you leave the granary, a peculiar sight catches your eye. A small pile of bones, bleached white and arranged in a crude circle by the miller's hut. It's a folk charm meant to ward off bad luck and pests. You remember that in some parts of medieval Europe, people believed placing animal bones or even human hair near their food stores would protect them from witches or evil spirits trying to spoil the harvest. Whether that truly worked? Well, historians still argue whether these superstitions actually helped reduce spoilage or if they were just psychological comfort for desperate souls. Back at your cottage, you knead dough with frozen fingers, trying to coax some warmth into the task. Baking bread in winter is an art form. Too much heat dries the crust, too little leaves it doughy and useless. You poke the fire and wait, listening to the crackle as it slowly gains strength. Food isn't just nourishment, it's a symbol. When you share a loaf, you're sharing hope, life, and a bit of defiance against the cold. Tonight you'll stew some salted pork with whatever root vegetables you have left, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a small piece of cheese saved from last month's barter. You recall hearing about medieval salt, how precious it was, a commodity so vital that entire economies hinged on its trade. Salt cured meat, preserved fish, and kept vermin at bay. Without it, winter food storage would be impossible. But salt was expensive, and not everyone could afford to use it generously. People had to ration it as carefully as their firewood. While waiting for the stew to simmer, you peer out the window. Smoke curls up from neighbors' chimneys, a thin sign of life in the cold grey day. Children, bundled like tiny waddling marshmallows, play briefly in the snow before retreating indoors. You remember how, despite the hardships, winter also brought moments of unexpected joy. Sledding, storytelling, the rare game of chance in the tavern. You set the table with simple wooden bowls, wiping the crust of flour from your hands. Just as you're about to sit, a knock sounds on the door. It's Mara, the village healer, her breath steaming in the cold air. She carries a bundle wrapped in linen, a fresh batch of herbs and some dried roots she's traded for. "Food for your stew," she says, with a smile that's warm enough to thaw your chilled bones. Mara's role is vital in winter, not just for medicine but for morale. Her knowledge of plants, poultices and old remedies often made the difference between sickness and recovery. Of course, some of her methods sound strange to modern ears, like using crushed nettles to wake the blood or bathing in stinging herbs to fight off chills. Historians still argue whether medieval healers were truly effective or mostly relying on placebo and faith. You thank her, and she lingers a moment, chatting softly about the weather and the upcoming feast day in January, a brief respite from winter's harshness when the village might gather to share food, song, and a bit of hope. As she leaves, you realize something important. Survival in winter isn't just about fire and food, it's about community. People rely on each other, even when the world outside seems bent on breaking them. Later, as you eat your stew, the flavors are simple but sustaining. The salted pork melts in your mouth, the root vegetables offer earthiness, and the bread soaks up the broth like a sponge, eager to carry warmth to your belly. You wonder how your ancestors did it, surviving winters harsher than this one, without modern heating or nutrition science. You think about that odd charm by the miller's hut and the stories told around fires, ways humans have always tried to tame fear with ritual and hope. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling shutters and making the trees moan. But inside, you sit quietly, feeling full enough to dream. And tonight, that's enough. The stew settles warmly in your belly, and you find yourself moving slower as the grey day begins its slow descent into an even darker evening. Winter nights feel endless, like the world has gone into hibernation and forgotten to wake you. But before the stars can blink into place, you have one more pressing task, something that in a medieval winter was nearly as critical as food and fire, preserving your physical health. You stretch your stiff limbs and try to ignore the ache in your lower back. No one calls it that yet, but this is basically medieval yoga, slow movements, careful stretches to keep the joints from seizing up. Your muscles feel tight from chopping wood, hauling grain, and constantly bracing against the cold. There's no gym, of course, but your daily routine is more demanding than a high-intensity workout. Hauling a water bucket from a frozen well, that's your arm day. Shoveling snow off the thatch roof, core strength. Lifting a hay bale for the goats, you've got glutes of iron, my friend. Your joints pop as you stand. You shuffle toward the hearth and reach for the pot of herbal ointment Mara gave you. It smells like a blend of rosemary, mint, and something else you can't quite identify. "Bear fat," she whispered, as if it were a secret. You massage it into your knees, the cool salve biting before it soothes. Medieval pain relief wasn't exactly glamorous. Forget ibuprofen, you had willow bark tea containing a natural precursor to aspirin if you were lucky, and if not, there was always prayer and gritted teeth. Some folks even wore amulets made of dried mole feet or fox testicles, we wish we were kidding, to ward off joint pain. Historians still argue whether such talismans were part placebo or pure tradition passed down through generations desperate for relief. Your neighbour Old Thomas swears by bee stings. He claims getting stung in the knuckles once a week keeps his fingers from curling up entirely. You're not quite brave or desperate enough for that yet. The physical strain of medieval life didn't stop for snow or sleet or the feeling that your spine might be crumbling into gravel. Work still had to be done. Still, you tried to pace yourself in winter. You weren't ploughing fields anymore, thank goodness, but snow had to be cleared. Paths had to be kept open, animals needed feeding and fences repaired after storms. Idle bodies grew stiff and stiff bodies became liabilities. As the sun dips, you step outside for some fresh air, though in this case fresh means crisp enough to stab your nostrils. You take a few deep breaths, feeling the sharp cold scrape down your throat. Movement in winter is deliberate. You don't run, you shuffle, careful not to slip on hidden ice, because a broken bone now is more than inconvenient. It could be fatal. Fractures were treated with crude splints, and infections were more feared than the injury itself. If the wound didn't kill you, the fever might. The village healer had a bone saw she rarely used, but when she did, well, let's just say people suddenly got very spiritual. Even something as simple as a twisted ankle could bench you for the season, leaving your family short an able-bodied worker and your pride as bruised as your foot. You remember when a neighbour slipped on the ice fetching water. His foot turned purple within days, and though Mara tried everything, compresses, prayers, leeches, it was weeks before he could hobble to chapel again. In the meantime, the village rallied to bring him food, chop his wood and check on his wife and children. It was mutual aid before anyone coined the term. Not exactly CrossFit, but the community kept itself strong in different ways. Back inside, you sit near the fire, easing your legs out in front of you. You rub your calves, wincing at the tightness, and decide it's a good time for a bit of passive therapy, namely soaking your feet in a basin of warm water. Luxury, in this weather, practically royalty. The heat seeps into your toes and radiates upward, loosening knots in your legs that you didn't even realize were there. A soft knock at the door draws you from your reverie. It's Laura, the blacksmith's wife, holding a clay bottle. "Mead," she whispers, "just a little, for the aches." You accept it like a sacred relic and thank her. Mead, fermented honey wine, was often used to dull pain, especially before bed. Not quite medicinal, not entirely recreational, but somewhere beautifully in between. You sip it slowly, the warmth tracing a soft line from your throat to your belly. This isn't a wild party drink, it's survival juice, the kind of thing that helps you unwind your overworked limbs and quiet the chattering in your mind. You let your eyes close for a moment, the fire's glow pulsing behind your lids like a lullaby in colour. But even as you relax, you can't help thinking about those who don't get this moment, those who are too injured to move, too sick to eat, or too alone to keep up with the daily demands. Winter was ruthless to the weak. You think of the elderly woman down the path, barely seen outside anymore. You make a mental note to check on her tomorrow. One slip, one fever, and she could disappear before anyone notices. So tonight you stretch again, slowly, mindfully. You rotate your wrists, roll your shoulders, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. The floor beneath you may be cold, but your body, at least for now, is warm, working and still yours. And in this harsh season, that's no small thing. The fire hisses as another log catches flame. You sit a little taller, the aches remain, but they feel manageable now, like old companions rather than enemies. You've earned your rest tonight, not by conquering, not by achieving, but simply by surviving one more day in this stubborn, frozen world. You stir before dawn, the pale light of morning barely teasing the edge of your shuttered window. Your joints creak in protest, but you've learned not to argue with them. You simply move slowly until they fall in line. Today's task looms like a distant thundercloud, keeping your humble home just warm enough to hold off the creeping frost. Because in a medieval winter, your home is only slightly better than outside. Slightly. The cottage is made of wattle and daub, interwoven wooden strips coated with a mix of mud, straw and something you're pretty sure used to be horse manure. You can smell it when the fire's low, like the house itself is breathing through chapped lips. The walls are drafty and the thatched roof sags in places, weighed down by old snow that has turned to ice. You shove your feet into your stiff leather shoes and feel your toes curl at the chill waiting inside them. Most homes in the village aren't much different. Unless you're lucky or lordly, you're living in a single-room structure shared with your whole family and a few animals for warmth. The chickens cluck quietly in the corner, still drowsy from sleep. The goat bleats once, unimpressed by the cold, unimpressed by everything, really. You envy its thick coat. The fire has burned down to embers. You bend over it and blow gently, coaxing flame from the red coals like you're waking a sleeping child. Sparks jump. You feed it dry sticks from the bundle near the hearth and offer a silent thanks that the wood is still dry. Historians still argue whether most peasants stored their firewood indoors or had some hidden nook in the barn. Either way, if your wood's wet, your mood's doomed. It takes longer today to get the fire going. The wind last night slipped through the walls and the room feels brittle, like it might shatter if you breathe too hard. You clutch your shawl tighter and move to the shutters, cracking one open just enough to peer outside. The snow has crusted over with a thin sheet of ice. Beautiful, dangerous. The world beyond the threshold is whitewashed and silent, save for the mournful groan of trees swaying under the weight of frost. You add peat to the fire next. It smells awful, but it burns hot, and that's all that matters. Coal is too precious for most homes saved for smithies and the manor house. You shift a stone aside and uncover your secret stash, dried moss, twigs, and even a few pine cones. Squirrel gifts, or perhaps just leftovers you scavenged weeks ago. Every scrap helps. Heating isn't a thermostat, it's a full-time job, and if your fire dies in the night, well, you could die right along with it. Insulation wasn't really a thing back then, not in the way you know it. Instead, people got creative. Strips of old cloth line the base of the door to stop wind sneaking in. Dried mud is stuffed into wall cracks like earthy caulk. On especially frigid nights, families would sleep side by side, children sandwiched between parents, wrapped in whatever furs and blankets they owned. Not exactly comfortable, but very warm. Personal space was a luxury, and medieval families didn't have time for that nonsense. One fringe method you've heard involves hanging tapestries or even salted animal hides on the walls to keep heat in. Decorative? Maybe. Functional? Definitely. You considered pinning up your old woolen cloak above the door, but then you'd freeze outside. Choices, choices. Today's core list includes checking the thatch for ice dams. You wrap yourself up in layers of wool and rough-spun linen, topping it off with a hood so heavy it makes your neck feel like it's carrying a sheep. The ladder creaks under your weight and you curse softly as snow trickles down your collar. You reach up and jab at the thick clumps of snow, hoping you don't dislodge half the roof while you're at it. Medieval roofing, not for the faint of heart or the heavy of foot. Back on the ground, you realize the house still isn't quite warm, so you get to work. You move a large stone near the hearth and sit on it while mending a rip in your bedding, letting the radiant heat rise into your back. Clever, right? Stones retain warmth. You line the sleeping area with them, heating them by the fire before nightfall, then tucking them near your bedding to keep the worst of the cold at bay. The trick, of course, is not burning your foot when you roll over onto one. You remember once hearing a merchant brag about his bed wagon, essentially a box bed on wheels that could be rolled closer to the fire. He claimed it was the future of sleeping. You don't have a wagon, but you do pile your straw mattress closer to the hearth when the frost creeps too far into your bones. Just don't inhale too deeply while you sleep. Straw is full of bugs, dust, and occasionally surprises like beetles with ambition. The wind howls again, reminding you that outside is always worse. You imagine what it's like for those who live on the edges of the village. Folks in huts, barely better than lean-tos, patched with reeds and hope. Some even shelter in abandoned ruins or the hollows of trees. You shiver, not just from the cold, but from the knowledge that winter was and still is a social sorting hat. The poor suffer most, always. Inside your home, you light a tallow candle. It smokes slightly, casting a dim orange glow against the dirt-smudged walls. It's not bright, but it's enough to see the soup pot and the half-knitted scarf on the bench. You sit down and take up your needles. Keeping warm isn't just about wood and fire, it's about layering, staying dry and moving often. And if you can add another scarf to your arsenal, you'll consider that a victory. By mid-morning, the fire is roaring and your home, while still drafty, feels survivable. You drape a damp tunic near the hearth, stretch your feet toward the warmth, and nibble on a dried plum from your stash. You exhale slowly. The house holds its breath with you. For a moment, everything is still. No creaks, no gusts, just warmth, thin and fleeting, but real. And in winter, that's enough. Outside, the snow crunches beneath your feet like brittle parchment, the kind you might have seen once in a monastery if you were very lucky or very lost. Your breath fogs the air in thick plumes as you trudge toward the barn. It's not a big barn, not by any stretch, more of a lean-to with ambition, but it houses the animals, and in winter that means everything. Not just because you need milk, wool, and possibly eggs, but because your survival is also measured in shovels of manure. You slide the door open with effort. It sticks, swollen from the cold, and finally gives with a loud crack that sends a nervous chicken flapping up to a beam. Inside, the air is warmer than outside, but only just. The goat eyes you with familiar disdain. The cow, if you're fortunate enough to have one, lets out a low groan and shifts her bulk. The animals are miserable too, though at least they have the good sense to grow thick winter coats. You, on the other hand, are still wearing patched wool and wish you could grow fur by sheer willpower. You get to work spreading fresh straw, part of what the medieval world calls bedding. But in winter it does double duty as insulation and odor control. Historians still argue whether animals were intentionally brought inside to warm homes or if people were just desperate for any kind of heat. Either way, there's no separating livestock from life. A few families even slept beside their pigs. You, however, draw the line at goats. They kick. Feeding time is tricky, fodder is scarce and getting scarcer. You've rationed hay from your late summer harvest, stacked tightly in the loft above and guarded like treasure. Each pitchfork you toss down feels like a withdrawal from a dwindling bank account. There's also turnips, soft, ugly ones the humans don't want. The animals don't seem to mind, they chew with such slow deliberation you start to think they're mocking you. Once fed, you milk the goat. She isn't thrilled, but she's cooperative enough, and you've learned to work quickly in this weather. Your fingers go numb on contact with the metal pail. The milk steams in the cold, a small sign that something warm can still exist in this world. You set it aside and check the water trough. Frozen, of course. Again, you grab a wooden mallet and smash the crust of ice, revealing slush below. It's enough for now. Animals need water or they'll stop producing. And if they stop producing, well, let's not think about that. You head to the back of the barn where a pile of steaming manure is doing its gross little miracle, generating heat. You crouch near it for a moment, feeling the slight rise in temperature, more psychological than physical. In some ways, manure is gold. It's compost, fuel, insulation, and if you're desperate, heat source. You remember hearing a traveler once claim that some medieval folks packed walls with it for warmth. You don't know if that's true, but you absolutely believe someone tried it. There's also the garden to consider, not the kind with pretty herbs and flowers, but a bleak patch of frozen earth where you've planted winter greens and root vegetables under heaps of straw and mulch. The ground is hard as stone now. You won't see anything grow until spring, but you still check out of habit, maybe hope. You scrape aside some mulch and press your fingers into the soil. Nothing, just cold. You retreat to the barn again, this time grabbing a few frozen apples from your storage bin. They're wrinkled and sour now, but still edible. You remember drying apple slices by the fire in early autumn, threading them like beads on string and hanging them from the rafters. Those are mostly gone now, eaten on colder nights when nothing else would satisfy. You've learnt to be resourceful, or as your neighbour says, creatively miserable. You spot the trap near the outer wall, empty. You set it days ago in hopes of catching a rabbit or at least a confused squirrel. Nothing. A bit of old bread still lingers inside, now hard enough to use as a weapon. You leave it, maybe tomorrow. By midday the animals are settled and you head back toward the house. Your scarf is stiff with frozen breath and your toes feel like brittle kindling. You pause by the woodshed, its roof sagging under snow. You run a hand along the stacked logs. Fewer than you remember. You count them out of habit, like they might multiply if you just focus hard enough. No luck. The firewood won't last forever. Still, you grab an armful and head back inside. The door groans shut behind you. Inside it's warmer, if not quite warm. You add more wood to the fire, then pour the fresh milk into a small pot and hang it above the flames. A pinch of dried herbs goes in. A luxury, but one you've earned. The scent rises gently, and for a moment it smells like home rather than hardship. You sit by the hearth, hands cupped around the warm mug, and finally relax. Outside the snow falls again. Inside the goat mutters from her corner, the chicken rustles in the straw, and the fire crackles like an old friend clearing its throat. You've done well today, the animals are fed, the house is holding together. You're not warm, but you're not frozen. That's the medieval definition of winning. And you can't help but chuckle, just a little, as you sip your milk and watch the steam rise. Because despite it all, you're still here. The night stretches on like a frozen tapestry, stitched together by creaking timbers and muffled wind. You lie on your straw-stuffed mattress, wrapped in layers of wool, fur, and whatever else could pass for warmth. But sleep doesn't come easily in a medieval winter. The cold gnaws at the edges of your blanket, slipping in with ghostly fingers to prod your spine. You pull your hood tighter and think of the dream you won't be having tonight. A roaring fire, endless bread, and a heated bath, maybe even one with scented oil if you're feeling indulgent. A loud thump jolts you, something shifting outside. You sit up slowly, the kind of slow that makes each joint snap like firewood. You wait. Nothing. Probably the wind or the goat, maybe both. You try to lie back down, but it's too late. Your thoughts have already wandered into the realm of winter dangers, not just the cold or starvation, but theft, wolves and wandering souls. Yes, the superstitions are still alive, especially in winter, when even the moon hides behind clouded veils. Historians still argue whether rural communities truly believed in the spectral visitations of the wild hunt, or if it was just a clever way to get kids to behave. You light a candle stub and move to the window, peeking through frost-laced slats. The snow glows dimly under a thin slice of moon. No figures, no movement. Still, you tighten the latch on the door, just in case. A neighbor once told you about lighting smudge fires of mugwort to keep bad spirits out. You never believed it, but now you kind of wish you had some mugwort lying around. With sleep off the table, you busy yourself with quiet tasks. You move to the small work table where bits of wool, bone needles and scraps of cloth are scattered. Mending is always on the to-do list. You pick up a threadbare sock, its heel more whole than fabric, and begin stitching by the firelight. Your hands are stiff, your stitches uneven, but there's comfort in the rhythm. You think about all the people across the countryside doing the same thing, each huddled by their fire, nursing frozen fingers and trying to make something last one more season. A half-eaten loaf sits under a linen cloth. It's dry, tougher than boiled leather, but still edible if you soak it in broth. You cut a piece and chew slowly, jaw working like an ox grinding grain. It's not glamorous, but it's fuel. Your grandmother used to say, in winter the stomach becomes the master of all decisions. She was right, and when the bread is gone, you'll move on to the hard cheese tucked in a cold nook under the eaves, or maybe some roasted acorns if you're desperate. You glance at the fire again. It's shrinking. You hate to use more wood, but you also hate frostbite. A familiar internal debate. You toss in one log, just one, and listen as the flames greedily lick it, flaring to life. For a moment, the whole room flickers with warmth and golden shadows. It's enough to give the illusion of coziness. To pass the time, you begin carving a bit of bone left over from a recent stew. It's not art, exactly, more like distraction therapy. You've managed a crude shape of a dog or maybe a bear, depending on the angle. It doesn't matter. The point is to keep your mind from settling into hopelessness. Because long winters can do strange things to lonely minds. You've seen it in others, a look in their eyes as if something in them had gone dormant with the sun. You hum quietly to yourself, something your mother used to sing while darning clothes, a melody older than memory, as steady as the seasons. Music, even in fragments, is one of the few luxuries left to you. You can't afford a harp, but your voice still works, kind of. Some monasteries, you've heard, allow the monks to sing only at certain times, preserving the purity of silence. But here, in your home, you make the rules within reason. A sudden gust shakes the shutters, and you're reminded how fragile all of this is. Just wood and straw between you and the wide, indifferent cold. You press your palm against the window pane, so cold it almost burns. You pull it back quickly and wrap your cloak tighter. You think about the concept of wintering, a time not just of survival but of withdrawal. Medieval people didn't expect productivity in the way we do now. Winter was for maintenance, reflection, spiritual focus. That's why feast days and holy festivals were so important. They broke up the monotony, gave structure to the slow spiral of snowbound days. You murmur a short prayer, not out of habit, but for a kind of psychological warmth. Faith, after all, is often the final layer you wear. You check the time, the only way you know how, by the height of the fire and the settling coals. Not quite midnight, you guess. Still hours to go. You rise, stretch, and pad toward the storage alcove. There's a jug of weak ale and a dried apple. You pour a small amount, the liquid sloshing with a sluggish hesitance, and take a careful sip. It's not good, but it's not bad. That sums up winter, really. Returning to your bedding, you adjust the furs and lie back down. The fire gives off a fading light, flickering against the ceiling beams like an old story being told in shadows. You close your eyes and listen, not just for danger but for the little sounds that prove you're not alone. The faint shift of the goat, the wind threading through the eaves, the distant howl of something that might be a wolf or just your own stomach protesting dry bread. One more deep breath. One more night. You haven't frozen, you haven't starved, you're doing okay. And that, in a medieval winter, is practically a miracle. You awaken in a slow, bleary haze, your nose tingling with the kind of cold that makes you question whether it's still attached to your face. The fire has dwindled to a bed of feeble embers, whispering warmth but not offering it. Your breath hangs in the air, a visible cloud that pulses with every exhale. You tuck your chin deeper into your cloak and groan quietly, because nothing feels better than not moving, and yet staying still means letting the cold win. You sit up, and every joint complains. Your back is stiff, your knees ache like you've aged a decade overnight, and your fingers feel like they've been soaking in icy water. Welcome to morning in a medieval winter. Forget the sunrise birdsong fantasy. What you get instead is silence, broken only by creaking beams and the distant clatter of someone else waking up and promptly regretting it. The first order of business. Fire, always the fire. You shuffle to the hearth like a pilgrim to a shrine. You poke the coals, blow gently and whisper encouragement as if that might help. A few sparks leap up your tiny miracle. You add twigs, then a handful of dry moss, then the smallest piece of kindling. Eventually a flame flickers to life and you sit back in relief, hands outstretched. You feel like Prometheus every time this happens, though without the whole eagle eating your liver bit. Historians still argue whether fire-starting tools like flint and steel were standard in every home or reserved for the more well-prepared. Either way, you count yourself lucky. You've known the shame of borrowing embers from a neighbor, carrying it home in a covered pot like a sacred relic. The phrase "don't let the fire go out" wasn't just metaphorical, it was survival doctrine. Next comes water. You bundle up again and step outside, boots crunching through the snow like splitting parchment. You head to the rain barrel, but it's frozen solid. Great. You'll need to break through the crust of ice or make the trek to the communal well, which is further than you'd like and already lined with groggy villagers wearing equal parts wool and despair. One man has tied heated stones in cloth to keep his fingers from stiffening. You file that one away for later use. When you return, cheeks flushed and teeth chattering, you pour the slushy water into the pot to warm it over the fire. It will serve as drinking water, face-washing liquid, and, if you ration carefully, the base for a thin porridge. You toss in a scoop of oats and a pinch of dried herbs. What passes for flavouring around here? It simmers slowly, filling the cabin with the scent of something edible, which is enough to lift your mood a few notches. As you eat, staring into the fire, you consider your options. Winter routines are predictable by design. The less you improvise, the less you risk. You check on your stores, root vegetables, still firm, dried beans, plenty, salted meat, thin on the slices. You'll have to stretch it. That's not an unfamiliar thought, though. Stretching things might as well be the medieval peasant motto. You spend the next hour repairing a hole in your roof with some bundled straw and a prayer. Wind keeps slipping in through the same loose plank, taunting you like a drafty poltergeist. You patch it, repatch it, and wedge it with whatever you can find. It's not pretty, but again, it works, which is often enough in a season where expectations are sub-zero. One of your neighbours stops by later, a rare visit, especially given the cold. She brings with her a small pot of rendered fat, which, if you're lucky, means you can finally dip a candle, and maybe even have some light past sunset. She sits for a moment, her hands red with chill, and you share a few words. Not many. Conversation in winter is less about chatter and more about mutual acknowledgement that yes, you are both still alive. She mentions a cow that's taken ill, possibly from damp hay or bad air in the barn. You nod solemnly. An animal sick in winter is like a coin toss with famine on one side and disaster on the other. You promise to send over some dried mint or old linens, whatever might help. It's not about being generous, it's about keeping the community web strong enough to catch you if you fall next. Later, you venture out to the edge of the woods with a dull axe and a hopeful heart. You search for firewood, but also for the odd edible plant that might be growing beneath the snow's crust. Some say you can find wintercress or chickweed if you know where to look. You're not convinced. The last time you foraged, you ended up gnawing bark like an amateur beaver. But you do find wood. Not much, but enough. You gather it like treasure and head home, arms loaded, boots slipping. You spot some footprints on the trail, too large to be a dog's, possibly a deer, possibly something else. You make a mental note to check the trap lines tomorrow, or not. You're already tired just thinking about it. Once back inside, the cycle repeats. Dry off, warm hands, feed the fire, check the roof, count the beans, poke the goat. Okay, not really, but she always looks like she expects a poke. You spend the late afternoon spinning wool with a hand spindle. It's a task that requires just enough focus to keep you awake, but not so much that it drains your remaining energy. The spindle whirs gently, hypnotically, and you lose yourself in the motion. Historians say even children as young as 5 would be taught to spin because idle hands were a luxury no one could afford. The resulting yarn might be uneven, but in winter, perfection is a wasteful standard. A candle flickers to life as the sun finally concedes. The room glows golden again, small and soft like it's shrinking back into itself. You take a seat near the fire, wrapping the spun yarn into a ball. You're not entirely sure what you'll make with it yet. Maybe a patch for your sock, maybe nothing. Sometimes it's enough to just do something useful with your hands, to feel like you're slowly, quietly defying the frost. And as night settles in once more, you think not with dread this time, but with a kind of stubborn peace about doing it all again tomorrow. The cold, it seems, is not content to merely nip at your fingers or settle into your bones, it wants your mind too. As the days drag into each other and the sun becomes more of a rumour than a presence, you begin to feel it, the creeping dullness, the fog behind your eyes. Winter isn't just a test of your body, it's a slow, patient siege on your spirit. Cabin fever, that's the modern term. Back now, it's more like a slow unspooling of self. You stare out the small frosted window, not because there's anything to see, really, just the same snow-covered expanse and the occasional dark flutter of a raven, but because you need something to do. Even the sky looks tired, a dull grey without depth, like a wool blanket someone left out too long. To keep yourself from dissolving into a melancholic lump, you attempt something ambitious, cleaning. Not because you care about cleanliness, exactly, but its movement, purpose. You sweep, dust, rearrange. You find a mouse's hidden stash of dried peas under the bench and briefly consider whether you should return it. Then you remember the mouse didn't gather them in a blizzard. You hum as you work, quietly, maybe tunelessly. People in your village often sing in winter, not out of joy necessarily, but out of tradition, of habit. Songs passed down like heirlooms. Some are lullabies, some are chants. One is a very weird ballad about a goose who curses its owner for turning it into stew. It's oddly catchy. Historians still argue whether seasonal depression, what we now call sad, was recognized back then. Certainly there was no term for it, but they knew the signs: people growing quiet, snapping at each other over nothing, crying for no reason, wandering off into the woods, sometimes not coming back. They didn't need a diagnosis, they just called it the winter madness. To stave it off, you try what people have always tried: distraction. You pull out your bundle of worn, greasy parchment, a letter from a cousin who moved south years ago to warmer lands where snow is something they hear about second-hand and never shovel. You've read the letter a dozen times. It doesn't matter. Every word feels like sunlight. He describes oranges. Can you imagine? Round, bright things that taste like warmth. You squint, just picturing one. You write a reply slowly. The ink is stubborn in the cold, thick and cranky. You warm the tip of the quill over the fire and try again. You don't say much. Mostly you talk about the weather, which is absurd because that's all there is, but sometimes writing it down makes it feel like it belongs to you, instead of the other way round. Then you settle in with your next project, patching a cracked mug. You mix a little wax, a little ash and some crushed eggshells, hoping the folk remedy for ceramic repair holds up. If not, you'll be drinking out of a wooden bowl until spring, and that bowl smells faintly of onions. Not ideal for morning tea. Speaking of tea, you boil water with dried mint and a sliver of root you're not entirely sure isn't mildly hallucinogenic. You sip cautiously, no visions. Yet, the goat bleats. Loudly, dramatically, You sigh and pull on your cloak. It's time for barn duties again. Out you go, bracing against the wind that seems to take personal offense at your existence. Inside the barn, it's only marginally warmer, but at least it's still. The goat eyes you with her usual judgment. You shovel out frozen waste, check the straw bedding, and refill the water trough with more slush than water. Then you give her a scratch behind the ears, not because she deserves it, but because you do. You need something warm-blooded, something living. Her eyes soften for a second. You think. Or maybe you're imagining that winter does strange things to the senses. Back indoors, you light another candle and sit by the fire. You've run out of new tasks and the sun hasn't even begun to set. So you do what everyone eventually does in this season. You reach for story. Your grandmother's tales come to mind, stories of winter spirits that would sneak into homes through cracks in the wood, looking for lazy people to pinch in their sleep. Stories of wolves that walked like men, of travelers who vanished into the snow only to reappear in the spring, smiling and silent. You never believed them, not really, but now, in this slow, frozen hush where shadows seem to stretch a little longer and silence seems to breathe, now you sort of do. And you wonder just for a moment if the walls are really keeping the cold out or just keeping you in. To ward off those thoughts, you decide to carve. It's something people have done for centuries to pass the time. You pick up a soft piece of pine and begin to shape it. You're not aiming for anything fancy. Maybe a spoon, maybe a fox holding a spoon, who knows? You let your hands take over while your mind wanders. That's the trick, keeping your fingers busy enough that your thoughts don't turn too inward. Quirky fact, in some villages it was customary for young men to carve love spoons during the winter and give them to the person they fancied when spring came. Some were so elaborate they looked like lace, others just looked like spoons. The gesture mattered more than the craftsmanship. You chuckle quietly, realizing your own creation probably falls into the latter category. Still, you set it on the mantel proudly, a monument to surviving yet another day of the cold, the dark, the dull. Eventually you lie back down by the hearth, not to sleep yet, just to rest. Your joints protest, your toes throb, but your mind is quiet. That's no small thing. You close your eyes and listen, not to anything in particular, but to the absence of sound, the kind of stillness that wraps around you like a woolen shawl. And in that silence you feel it again, the strange strength that winter forces on you. Not flashy, not heroic, but steady, stubborn, quiet. Like fire coaxed from wet wood, like warmth wrestled from a world that offers none freely. You wake to the creak of the wind pressing against the boards again. It's not quite morning, just that dim grey smear that passes for dawn this time of year. You roll over and consider pretending to sleep for another hour, but your body has other plans. Your bladder in particular does not care for the poetic idea of lingering. Outside, the snow has shifted again. Wind-blown drifts lean like toppled sculptures against the wall. You squint toward the barn. The outline is still there. Good. Sometimes the wind plays tricks and things just disappear for a while. That time the outhouse vanished completely was unfortunate. Before you step outside, you bundle in layers again. Woolen socks, linen undershirt, tunic, cloak, hat, gloves. A look less medieval noble, and more shambling haystack with ambitions, but warmth is fashion now. As you trudge through the thigh-deep snow, you think again of how entire communities would often become islands in winter. No visitors, no news, just your same familiar faces, often too familiar, looping in and out of the same chores, the same gossip, the same soup. You visit the neighbour's house to check in. It's customary this far into winter to make sure nobody's quietly frozen. You knock, they grunt, still alive, excellent. You swap small talk, how's the goat, still grumpy, how's your firewood, barely hanging on. They offer you a boiled turnip as a gesture of goodwill. You pretend it's delicious, it's not, but it's hot, and that counts for something. Back home, you consider what might be the greatest midwinter debate of all. Do you dare open the sealed barrel of pickled fish now, or save it until desperation hits? You prod it gently, still intact, barely. That pickle brine is a mystery even modern science might fear. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually enjoyed some of these winter preservation foods or merely tolerated them with grim determination. Fermented skate, salted eels, and something disturbingly called black broth show up in records. They're described with words like rich or pungent, which often translates roughly to good luck getting through that bite. You go for the rye bread instead. It's dry and tough, and slightly sour, but at least it doesn't fight back. You chew slowly, trying not to imagine what your cousin in the warm south is having for breakfast. Something with eggs, probably. Maybe even cheese. You haven't seen cheese in weeks. After eating, you sit by the fire and tend to your boots. They've taken a beating, stiff with frost, the leather cracked at the seams. You rub in animal fat to soften them. It works, sort of, and smells intense. You remind yourself that this smell is historically accurate, and probably why medieval flirting wasn't all that subtle. Then you check your traps. You don't expect much, but surprise, one has caught something. A rabbit. You murmur thanks, softly, not because you're superstitious, but because you sort of are. In many parts of the medieval world, animals were seen as more than just food. They had spirits, omens, meanings. You once heard someone say rabbits bring luck. You hope that extends to not getting dysentery. You dress the rabbit quickly. It's not pleasant, but it's food. You stew it with onion peel, some root vegetables, and a handful of dried nettle. It smells like promise, like maybe today won't be terrible. You even throw in the last scrap of dried apple, a little sweetness to trick the brain into feeling full. As it simmers, you pull out the gaming board. Just a simple thing, carved squares and coloured pebbles, but it helps. You play against yourself, switching sides every few turns. You win and lose. You cheer and groan dramatically to an invisible audience. Your inner theatre critic gives it 3 stars. Games like this were a real part of winter life. People played an early Nordic board game or dice games that got a little too competitive. One Danish legend tells of a man who lost his cloak in a dice game and tried to gamble his own beard next. Spoiler, he lost that too. You stir the stew and finally sit down to eat. Slowly, reverently. This is one of the rare good meals. You imagine you're at a banquet just for fun. There's music, laughter, an overcooked roast, and a juggler who's clearly had too much mead. You chuckle to yourself and take another bite. The door rattles, a gust of wind, or something more. Your heart skips, then just the wood shrinking again in the cold. But it reminds you, even inside, the winter finds ways to press in. You light more candles. You place them near walls that feel particularly cold, more as a gesture than a solution. The flickering light makes the shadows dance, but you find it comforting. You add more straw under the blankets. A poor man's featherbed, but softer than the hard floor. You layer your clothes again, sleeping fully dressed. Now is the rule, not the exception. You tuck hot stones under your feet. They were heated by the fire earlier, wrapped in rags now, just enough to stave off the chill that seeps into your bones like gossip into a village square. Then, in one of those strange moments of winter clarity, you remember a story, something your grandfather told you about the man who saw the sun dance on the coldest day of the year. He said it meant spring would come early. You wonder if he made it up. Probably. But still, you step outside just for a second. The stars are out. Cold, sharp, uncaring, but beautiful. You tip your head back and breathe. The air is so cold it feels like it has teeth, but your breath clouds warmly, and for a moment it feels like you're part of something ancient. All those winters before you, all those people staring at this same sky, surviving. You return inside, cheeks burning. You wrap yourself up again and let your body sink into stillness. There's no music, no screens, just the creak of wood, the soft crackle of coals, and the deep, slow rhythm of your own breath. You've made it another day. The wind howls tonight like it's telling secrets no one wants to hear. Not the dramatic kind either, just long, miserable moans that worm their way through every tiny gap in the wood. The kind that remind you the winter's not over yet, not by a long shot. You pull your cloak tighter and stare at the low embers in the hearth. They're still glowing, but barely. The fire has to last until morning. You've already burned through the good wood, the stuff that doesn't smoke too much or spit at you when it burns. Now you're into the weird punky logs that hiss like angry cats and smell faintly like mushrooms, not the fun kind. As you poke the coals with a stick that might once have been part of your neighbour's fence, don't ask, you reflect on the strange little rituals you've developed. Staring contests with the icicles hanging from the beams, whispering jokes to the potatoes in the root cellar, counting your socks even though you know exactly how many you have. 2, and one of them has a hole shaped exactly like Sardinia. You've named it that now, your Sardinian sock. You settle in with your wool-wrapped stone under your feet, that secret weapon against the chill, and try to relax, but your nose still feels like it's about to fall off. You press it against your mitten. Success. Temporary thaw. This is the part of winter that really tests you. Not the snowstorms or frozen doors, that's all loud and obvious. No, it's the slow, creeping sameness. The days blur together like peas in a stew. Everything is brown and beige and cold. The novelty of cozy wore off weeks ago. Even your dreams have started taking place in root cellars. Still, you go through the motions. Tonight's supper was thin porridge with some onion peel for flavour. Not exactly exciting, but it did the job. You tried adding crushed dried berries, but it just turned it a strange pink colour that looked medically suspicious. Still, no one died. That counts as a culinary win in this house. Outside, the snow is deep enough now that you can't open the front door fully. You've started using the back entrance, which now leads into a hallway of snow so narrow it feels like a freezer with ambition. You shovel it out every morning, then watch it refill like clockwork. You begin to suspect the snow has a personal grudge. Inside, your clothes hang stiff on the drying rack. That's optimistic. Drying is not really the word, they're just less wet. You hold a pair of linen trousers near the fire and rotate them slowly like a marshmallow you never get to eat. That counts as entertainment now. You hum to yourself. Old songs, nonsense rhymes, things your mother sang when you were small. Sometimes you pretend you're a bard in a great hall, performing for lords and ladies with hot wine and too many dogs. You strum the air and say, "My next song is called Please Send Socks." No one laughs, except you. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had much time for music or storytelling in the dead of winter. Some accounts say they sang often, especially during work. Others claim people were too tired, too cold, or too busy surviving to do more than mumble and nod. You decide the truth is probably both. Tonight, you hum anyway. Then there's the great lice debate. Yes, we're going there. You scratch under your hat and wonder. Back then, lice weren't a rare horror. They were basically roommates. People even had special combs for them, and some brave souls used candle wax to catch them. You, fortunately, haven't seen one yet this winter, but you do keep that candle handy, just in case. You look at your candle now. It's burning low. You've been conserving them, of course. Fat and wax aren't easy to come by. But sometimes, especially on the longest nights, you light one just for the glow, just to remember what warm used to look like. You read a scrap of parchment someone gave you months ago, a tiny story copied in clumsy script. It's about a knight who wandered the woods and found a magical spring that never froze, even in deepest winter. You read it slowly, savoring each word like a bite of something sweet. Whether it's true doesn't matter. You let it warm your mind. You think of spring, just barely. The idea is dangerous, like staring at the sun. You don't want it too much, but you picture it anyway. Mud instead of snow, green poking through brown, the return of noise, birds, bees, children shrieking as they chase one another without slipping into snowbanks. You imagine the first egg laid by a hen after weeks of nothing, a miracle wrapped in calcium. But for now, you sleep. You lie down wrapped in wool, with your feet tucked into a fur-lined sack you stitched from an old cloak. It's not glamorous, it's not even comfortable, but it works. Your eyes close, you think of the rabbit stew, of the starlight, of the things you've managed to endure. The wind howls again, but it's softer now, or maybe you're just used to it. Your fingers are warm, your stomach isn't empty, and for tonight, just tonight, that's enough. The fire is nothing but a soft orange whisper now, flickering beneath ash. The air settles. You've done all you can for the day, fed yourself, tended the embers, padded the floor with extra straw, and survived. That's no small thing. Outside, the snow still falls in fine, weightless grains, stacking into impossible stillness. You listen to the faint sigh of wind across the roof, but it sounds almost like breathing now. Not a threat, not a chill, just winter exhaling. Your limbs are heavy in the best way. The weight of woolen furs wraps you like a long, slow story. You shift once, then still. Your breath is slow, steady. It fogs slightly in the dim candlelight, warm enough to stay, cool enough to remind you this is winter, but you've met it well. And even though the sky is still dark and morning is a mystery, you feel it, that tiniest whisper of change, a soft tug in the air, a longer pause between gusts. The feeling may be imagined, maybe not, that soon something will begin to shift. A drop will melt, a bird will sing, and the world will start to thaw. Not yet, not tonight, but soon. So rest now, let your breath slow, let the thoughts unravel gently. The snow will keep falling, the stars will keep burning, and you will keep dreaming.